There are a lot of real estate investors who are contacting sellers directly about selling their homes. Last summer, it happened to me when I was preparing to list my house for sale. It has happened to a friend of mine who is also a real estate agent. I talked to a client the other day, and he said that he has been getting a lot of solicitations from investors about purchasing his house. And those offers can be very, very tempting. And one of the things that they kind of use to make it sound like it's so much better than listing with a real estate agent is not having to pay the real estate commission and being able to close quickly and things like that. And I am here to warn you that when you receive these offers from investors, be very, very careful. My name is Sharon Smoot. I'm a realtor and a residential real estate closing attorney in the metro Atlanta area. And today I am going to be sharing a real life case study about what can happen when you sign on with one of these investors. And I don't want you to think that this is how it happens across the board, but I am seeing this type of thing more and more frequently. It happened to a friend of mine last year, and I was contacted earlier this week by one of my legal clients who is a real estate agent, and she has a client who has gotten mixed up in one of these situations. So I'm going to do a quick screen share with you. It's probably not going to be that quick because I really want to go over this agreement that my client's client signed and talk to you about why these types of documents are so problematic and why it is really not beneficial for you as a seller in ordinary circumstances to sign this type of agreement. Now, there are circumstances where maybe it could be beneficial, but the way this document is written, and it's very similar to the one that my friend signed last year, that was from a completely different investor. So all I want to do is warn you to be very, very careful before you sign anything, and I'll explain to you the reasons why as we go through the contract. So let's take a look at it. So I'm going to do a quick screen share, probably not so quick, because I really want to go over this document in detail and just tell you what the problematic areas are. And there are more than a few. And this is why you really need to be so cautious and understand what you're signing before signing. So, this is what purports to be a purchase and sale agreement between this investor and this seller. And the first paragraph that I want to talk about is the close of escrow paragraph. Incidentally, up here where I've redacted the names, he identified the seller and the investor as the buyer. He should have had the seller's name and seller in parentheses. So that's one thing. But let's talk about the close of escrow paragraph. And let me see if I can enlarge this. Okay. So here we are, close of escrow. It says closing shall occur no later than 45 days after the execution of a valid purchase and sale agreement by a replacement buyer, as defined in the marketing period and replacement buyer section. Buyers shall have up to 120 days from the commencement of marketing to procure a replacement buyer. The total contract term shall not exceed 165 days from the start of buyer's marketing period unless extended in writing by both parties. So there are a couple of problems with this paragraph, and I'm just going to highlight this right here. Uh-oh. Just a second, take that out. So first off, closing shall occur no later than 45 days after execution of a valid purchase and sale agreement by a replacement buyer. Replacement buyer? What the heck are you talking about? You're supposed to be buying the property. Nope. What this contract is doing is allowing this person to market the property to find an actual buyer to purchase it. That's something that your real estate agent would do. They would market the property and find you a buyer without all of this extra stuff. Okay. So 45 days after the replacement buyer and the seller sign the contract, that's when it's supposed to close. This says that the buyer has 120 days, that's 4 months, to find a replacement buyer. Your real estate agent, if you were to hire one, would probably ask you to sign a listing agreement for somewhere between 3 months and 6 months. That's something that can be negotiated. But in this document, the seller is agreeing to give this buyer 120 days to find a replacement buyer. And it says that the total contract term shall not exceed 165 days. That's 120 days to market the property, and then 45 days after the purchase and sale agreement between the seller and the replacement buyer is executed. So this is just a bunch of, I don't know, hide the potato kind of stuff. They're not doing anything that a licensed real estate agent wouldn't be doing to get your home sold. Okay. So then the next thing that it says is that buyer shall have the sole discretion to select the title agency or closing attorney. And if title isn't clear by the scheduled close of escrow, it extends up to 10 business days after clear title is available. This isn't so different from the standard Georgia Association of Realtors purchase and sale agreement, which gives the buyer, in the event that the buyer is obtaining financing, the right to select the closing attorney. So I'm not real up in arms about that paragraph. The next paragraph, expenses, buyer shall pay all related closing costs, blah, blah, blah. That's not necessarily problematic. The next paragraph says that the seller is responsible for clearing any liens, judgments, debts against the property. That's not a problem. Property condition, I really don't see any issues with that. Taxes, leases, and possession, blah, blah, blah. Those are okay. So my next issue is with the earnest money and cancellation paragraph. So let's highlight that. Earnest money and cancellation. It says buyer is not required to deposit earnest money. However, the buyer will require any replacement buyer or end buyer to deposit earnest money equal to 1% of the final purchase price with the designated title company. Earnest money shall be held in escrow by the designated title company and shall be applied to the purchase price at closing. If title cannot be transferred, the end buyer's deposit will be refunded and the transaction canceled. If the replacement buyer cancels the transaction for any reason not attributable to the seller or title issues, their deposit shall be forfeited to the seller as compensation for lost time and opportunity. So one of my biggest issues with this provision is that this buyer is asking the seller to hold their property off market for 120 days while they market it to someone else. And when I say hold it off market, this agreement basically is saying that the seller isn't going to hire a real estate agent to actually professionally market their property and find them a buyer. They're going to allow this person, this investor, to do the work of a real estate agent. And this investor is not obligated to pay them any earnest money in the interim. So I have a real problem with that. This says that it's an as is sale, which is fine. If the property is damaged before closing, the buyer can elect not to proceed, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So this next paragraph that I have a real issue with is marketing and novation rights. So this says that the seller is granting the buyer the right to actively market the property for resale across a variety of platforms and channels. That's the same thing that a real estate agent would do. This includes, but is not limited to, listing the property on the MLS through a licensed broker appointed by buyer. Well, you know what? You could choose your own real estate agent, someone that you trust and that you have a rapport with and who you feel is going to look out for your best interest, rather than leaving it to this investor to do. You don't know who he might put your property in the hands of and whether they are actually looking out for your best interest or for somebody else's best interest. So I have a real problem with that. Running advertising campaigns across online, print, signage, social media, blah, 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 blah. All the things that you could hire your own real estate agent who has a fiduciary duty to you to do. Your real estate agent is obligated to work on your behalf. This investor is not obligated to do anything that's in your best interest. It says that the seller further agrees that buyer shall have the sole and exclusive right to assign or novate this agreement to another buyer, partner, or investor. Buyer may also direct title to transfer directly to a third-party purchaser. Upon execution of a novation or assignment, buyer shall be released from any further obligations under this agreement, and either buyer or the replacement buyer shall be responsible for any additional transfer taxes incurred. So essentially what this is saying is that if this buyer, this investor, decides to assign the contract, he can do that and you don't have to agree to that. And without your agreement, without your consent. He can novate without your consent. You're basically giving him that consent right here in this document. Now, typically, the way an assignment works is I'm the investor. I make an offer on your home, and the Georgia Association of Realtors contract says that I, as the buyer, can assign the contract to a third party as long as I give you written, or I receive written authorization to do that from you. You can refuse to allow me to assign the contract unless there's some other stipulation that we agree to that says that I have the right to assign it. So you agree to allow me to assign the contract. What I have to do is provide the end buyer with a copy of the contract, because the end buyer is obligated to purchase the property pursuant to the terms of the agreement that I have with you. Basically, they are stepping right into my shoes and they're going to purchase the property directly from you. They're bound by everything that you and I have already agreed to. And if for some reason that end buyer defaults, the investor, in this instance, me, that you originally went under contract with, is still liable for any damages that you might suffer. With a novation, which is completely different than an assignment, there would be a completely new agreement written up and signed between you and the end buyer. I would be relieved of any liability and obligation under the contract. Novation essentially means new. So it's a new agreement between you and the end buyer. And this says that this buyer has the sole and exclusive right to assign or novate the contract. You don't know who he might be assigning it to. So I just don't like that. It says that the seller agrees not to engage in marketing, listing, or offering the property for sale through any other party during the term of this agreement without buyer's written consent. Only buyer may assign or novate this agreement. Seller may not assign or transfer their interest without buyer's prior written consent. So let's just say that you decided that you just wanted to put the property in the title of your son because you're leaving the country and you don't want to be bothered with this anymore. You can't do that according to this agreement. And it says that the buyer is acting as a principal and not as an agent or a broker. That's really interesting because this buyer in this contract is doing a whole lot of stuff that a licensed real estate agent or broker would be doing, yet they're not acting as a broker or an agent. I'm just saying. So now this next paragraph is the one that really just infuriates me. So, let me do this a little bit better. Okay. Authorization to act. The seller agrees to appoint the buyer, in this case, the investor, as their attorney in fact through a limited power of attorney specific to this real estate transaction. This makes me so mad because there are no circumstances under which any property owner should be giving power of attorney to some random investor to handle the sale of their property. You should not do that. You don't know what they might be signing. You don't know what they might be obligating you to. You should never, ever give power of attorney to some random person that you don't know anything about. And in this case, it says that the power of attorney is being given to an LLC. I don't even believe that that's legit, but and I'm not even going to get into that in this video. It goes on to say this authorization permits the investor, the buyer, to execute all necessary documents related to the listing, marketing, resale, assignment, novation, and closing of the property, including but not limited to listing agreements, property disclosures, purchase and sale agreements, and seller side closing documents. It's your house. Why would you allow the investor, basically the middleman, to go into the closing attorney's office and sign documents for you? That does not make sense. You don't know this person from Adam, yet you're giving them authorization to sign documents on your behalf. I don't like it, not one bit. It says this power of attorney does not authorize any changes in the terms of this agreement without the seller's prior written consent. They put that in there to try to make you feel a little bit better. The seller agrees to complete and sign the power of attorney before a notary public provided by the investor. The power of attorney shall become effective immediately upon notarization and shall remain in effect through the completion of the transaction or until revoked in writing by the seller. The seller agrees not to revoke this limited power of attorney except with 5 days written notice to buyer and only if the contract has not yet entered escrow. So essentially, what they're saying is that you are bound by this agreement unless you give them 5 days notice of your intention to revoke it and escrow hasn't been opened by the closing attorney. So, you're kind of stuck. You're kind of stuck. And I think a lot of the times what happens with these agreements is that the seller, number one, doesn't read them carefully and really doesn't understand what they're obligating themselves to. It's sent to them to e-sign. They go ahead and e-sign it. They just automatically jump down to the signature line. It hasn't been thoroughly explained to them. And so they have no idea the risk that they're opening themselves up to just by virtue of this paragraph alone. And I'm not sure in this situation if the seller actually received the power of attorney. I'm waiting for my real estate agent client to get back to me to let me know if he has actually already signed the power of attorney. And my advice, if he has not, would be don't sign it. Just refuse to sign it. Okay. And if he has already signed it, to go ahead and give that notice to revoke it. Then it says the POA shall not authorize any financial encumbrance or obligation on seller beyond those expressly agreed in this contract. Now, here's the kicker with that. This investor has filed a memorandum of purchase and sale agreement in the real estate records where this property is located. So that effectively creates a cloud on title. A cloud on title means that the seller, if he were to sell the property to someone else, he wouldn't be able to close until this memorandum of purchase and sale agreement has been canceled. A cancellation would have to be filed in the real estate records to say, hey, this document is no longer in play. This memorandum of purchase and sale agreement is no longer in play. So as you can see, the power of attorney doesn't authorize any financial encumbrance, but they sure did go right on down to the courthouse and file this memorandum of purchase and sale agreement to kind of strong arm the owner of this property into staying in this agreement, which is arguably not even an enforceable contract because it does not meet all the terms to be a legally enforceable contract. So the next paragraph that causes me concern is the marketing period and replacement buyer contract. The buyer will have 120 days from the date professional photos are taken and marketing activity begins to actively market the property and secure a replacement buyer. So this contract was signed on, I think, January 5th, but there's no date in here that specifically says that the photos have to be taken by that date. So this buyer could wait a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and the marketing period hasn't begun because the professional photos haven't been taken. If this said that professional photos will be taken within 10 days of the date that this agreement is signed, if professional photos have not been taken by that point, then seller may terminate the contract. Yeah, that might be okay. But the fact that the marketing is not even required to begin until professional photos are taken, and this buyer has 100% control over when those professional photos are taken, makes this extremely one-sided and very uncertain. When will the 120 days be up? Is it 120 days from the 5th of January? Are you going to have the pictures taken on the 5th of January, the day that we signed this? Is it going to be 2 days from now, 10 days from now, 30 days from now, 45 days from now? There's nothing in here that requires the seller to have those professional photos taken and to start the marketing by a certain date. So this could literally have the seller waiting for an indefinite period of time before that 20-day marketing period even begins. So you can see how problematic that is. The next thing is that once a replacement buyer is secured, closing shall take place within 45 days. It says if no replacement buyer is secured within 120 days from the start of marketing, seller may terminate this agreement by providing written notice to the title company with all parties copied. If any replacement buyer introduced or procured by buyer during the 120-day marketing period enters into a purchase and sale agreement and closes on the property within 60 days following the expiration of this agreement, seller shall be entitled, or I'm sorry, buyer shall be entitled to a 3% finder's fee payable at closing. Almost sounds like that's a real estate commission, but okay, we'll call it a finder's fee. So it's just indefinite. So between this buyer not paying any earnest money and the kind of uncertainty about when the marketing of the property will begin, you can see that the seller is really in a bad situation and kind of up a creek. And let's not forget that memorandum of purchase and sale agreement that has been filed in the real estate records. So this is just a very, very problematic circumstance to find yourself in as a seller. And in the instance of the actual seller of this property, he has kind of come to his senses and realizes that he's allowed himself to be backed into a corner by getting mixed up with this investor. And here's the thing, they present it to you as though this is a much better alternative for you. But is it really? They're not doing anything that your real estate agent wouldn't do. And the thing about it is that your listing agreement with the real estate agent is going to tell you how you can cancel the contract and what your obligations are if you cancel the listing agreement before the term expires. The listing agreement is going to tell you when marketing will begin. It's not going to be some elusive date, and it'll be a date that you and your real estate agent have agreed upon. So aside from, well, let me backtrack. And because in this particular agreement, there was no hard date for the marketing to begin, you as the seller are basically in a position to be strung along. That means you're continuing to have to pay your mortgage if you have one, taxes, property insurance, maintenance, and upkeep. And you don't know what's being done to market the property. And when I think about my friend who got mixed up in this, she was supposed to close based on this contract that she signed, like by April 30th of 2025, 2024, it was 2024. And it got dragged on and on and on. And she had signed this power of attorney, and they didn't even provide her with copies of the things that she had signed. So, I mean, it was just a mess. And after all was said and done, I think it was like, I don't know, 5 or 6 months later that it finally closed. And it did finally close, but it did not close for the amount that she expected it to. They had given her a sales price of 300 and some odd thousand. And she said that they ended up charging her all of these fees and that it was just a mess. And, I was like, girl, that's why you should have listed it with me, like we originally discussed. But She had an ex-husband that she was dealing with, and the ex-husband wanted to use this investor person, and it really did not favor them. I think she said after all was said and done, they netted I don't know, $30,000 to $40,000 less than they had expected. So when you factor that in, if she had hired me at a 6% compensation, let's just say it was 300,000, that is what, $18,000. So she still would have come out ahead of where she did by getting mixed up with this investor and signing this type of agreement and giving them power of attorney. And she was uncertain as to whether her house was in the multiple listing services. I looked it up and it was not. They kept telling her that they had a buyer, there was going to be a home inspection. They kept telling her that the photos were going to be taken. And I'm not sure if she said they ever came out and took photos. So it was just real skeezy and scammy. And I just don't want to see any seller get taken advantage of by this type of shady, opaque kind of deal, or any of the scammers that are stealing title or anything else. So, if you have questions about selling a house in the metro Atlanta area, if you have been approached by one of these investors, I would be more than happy to talk to you. Take a look at any documents that they've asked you to sign. All you have to do is use the link in the description of this video and schedule a seller consultation. It is that simple. It is no obligation, and I would be more than happy to help you.